I'll go through a little bit about my background, whatever. Some of you have been in this room all day, so I guess you're probably getting tired of this. First off, I am an attorney here with the Dale Law Firm here, which is, I think that's the banner we're under. Much like Amy, I wear different hats, and we'll go through that a little bit. We are a full-service estate planning office that focuses almost entirely on working with persons with disabilities and their families and conservatorships and things like that. Now, I am not here looking for clients, okay? And in fact, I have to warn you, right now we have a wait here. It's not that we want to turn you away, but the other part of it, and I don't think Ben asked me to come here so I can hawk trust. That's not really what we're here to do. You know, part of it is, I mean, maybe we can keep the questions this way. Is there, you know, there was a time when we were the only game in town. That's decades ago that changed. There's many other fine attorneys we might actually talk about when you're hiring an attorney and that kind of thing and what's involved in this. We'll stick to the program as best we can. The other thing that I do, and for those of you that were in the last program, and by the way, we are recording this, and if it turns out okay, it may see the light of day. If I don't like it, I'll erase it up here. But for those of you that are here that are watching this on the internet, we just finished a program on advocacy and that kind of thing to keep the Lanterman Promise program. We did that under an organization called the Golden State Pool Trust. So one thing when I became an attorney, I decided under no circumstances am I going to become the trustee of a special needs trust? Not something I'm interested in doing. I had helped establish the Golden State Pool Trust as their counsel. We need to replace their trustees. And about 15 years ago, I took over as the temporary trustee, which apparently didn't mean what I thought it meant here. So I am the trustee of somewhere between 200 and 250 beneficiaries. So a lot of it is in the administration of the trust here. And I have to tell you, and I think this is a problem, oftentimes when we're doing planning, people mistake the document with what we're really doing because buying a trust, it's just a nice piece of paper, okay? I mean, it's not like, by the way, we do really nice paper here. They're very pretty, and we have lots of, some of you are clients, you can verify this, lots of words, okay? We have a word processor, and we are not afraid to use it. So there's a lot of words. You know, with it, what the trust is as we go through this is it's setting up a system, what I like to call it is a private social service system for your child with a disability. But if you think a piece of paper is going to protect your child, you are out of your mind. It is the trustee in the end that's going to make the most difference, okay? And I have to tell you, some people mistake doing this planning with merely producing the document. You know, it is really part of it in the end. Most of you that are here, you are parents and you are giving up your Saturday afternoon because you care. You're probably concerned about the future of your child with a disability. Otherwise, you wouldn't be out here. You'd be out there doing something a lot more fun than listening to some stinking attorney, right? But the thing about it is that when you're working on this, like we had said in the last program, being the parent of a disabled child is like going to a university you are never going to graduate from because they keep changing the classes every year. They keep changing the rules. You go from one transition period to another, to another, to another. And you know, the thing about it, as Liz was talking about, is like when I was a young nurse, by the way, I was a psych nurse for 17 years and worked in state hospitals. Here, Down syndrome, good example. We never worried about their longevity. They never lived long enough to really worry about it. Now we don't know the upper end of how long these folks are living. That's obviously a good thing, but the old thing about I'm just going to outsurvive my child, that doesn't work in every situation. And once again, this is a long-term game. So this is something to take a look at. The message being that you want to make sure that when you're doing this, you're working with somebody who's relevant, who understands the community and understands the resources in your community. But in the end, it's going to be the trustee that matters. So when we define the challenge, when somebody's asked to define a special needs trust, the typical answer is to preserve public benefits. Now, how many of you have children that are on SSI. And out of those here, and keep your hands up if this is true, how many of you would like to be on SSI yourself? Right? Nobody? Okay. I've never had anybody paying attention put their hand up, right? Because once again, it's not exactly the most fun program in the world, okay? And in a lot of ways, it becomes kind of a necessary evil. And as we go through a little bit, if we were going to go through heavy into benefits, it's not the SSI, it's usually the Medi-Cal, but it's like sometimes we have to look at what our objective is. And the thing we run into oftentimes with disability is that our job is to enable our loved one with a disability to live as good a quality of life as possible in the community and be able to enjoy things that many of us just take for granted, okay? Well, how do we do this when we have these stupid programs like SSI where you can't give them cash, right? So when we talk about ABLE, we talk about, trying people that can't manage money. Well, of course they can't manage money. They never had any money in the first place, right? Or how are we going to enable folks to take more control of their life with these trusts when what we're going to learn is the trustee has absolute discretion and the beneficiary has none? How are we going to make this work? And like everything else, the more you understand it before you get involved in doing this planning, the more likely you're going to be able to go through all of these confusing concepts and come up with something that meets your needs and your child's needs. Focusing only on preservation of benefits misses the big picture, okay? And I will tell you just a little more about my background. I was born in San Jose, California on a farm in 1951. There used to be farms, which is like orchards with trees and all of that. They're all gone, but they honest to God, they were there. And my grandparents ran an orchard, and also the family worked at Agnew State Hospital. And I am going to say something you might find shocking. That was the end of the period where I think the hospitals actually served a legitimate purpose and did a good job. We like to bash the institutions here and go, well, we can deal with these problems in the community because at least it's better than the state hospital. As the state hospital degenerated, yes, it was horrible. And I saw it. I lived it. I saw the best. I saw the worst. To think that can't happen in the community because institutions are not necessarily things with walls. The Lanterman system is an institution, like it or not, okay? And like Ed Roberts used to say, if all we do is move people into 6-bed group homes and keep them isolated, what did we really do? All we did is move people from big institutions to small institutions. It's being part of the community. If people involved in administering your child's needs do not understand that, what are the chances they're really going to help your child meet the highest quality living possible? And the answer is no. Most of this is not intuitive. I have to tell you, most of the parents I work with have had no experience with this, and you learn as you go. And I hear this over and over again. I had no idea. I had no idea. I had no idea. Well, here we are. The true objective should be qualifying going for quality of life, not just keeping people on welfare programs. In fact, in many cases, a good estate plan is going to work on how to get them off of these stupid programs. I would submit to you that you cannot be fully independent on SSI. That is not a thing, okay? You might be able to make peace with it. You might be able to compromise, but you cannot be independent on SSI. That is not a thing. The objective of most of the families we work with is to focus on quality of life. Maintaining benefits is only a tool. In fact, the other thing is, as you get more and more educated about this, most of your children, when you pass away, are not going to be on SSI anyway. They're going to be on a different program, assuming our friends in Congress really do not mess around with Social Security, but that's not today's topic. The special needs trust and ABLE accounts are tools. All they are tools. They're neither good nor are they evil. They are tools, but they can be used to help maintain quality of life. So here's the thing, and for many of you, you should not have a hard time with this. In fact, oftentimes I carry a doll with me, which is kind of creepy here in a wheelchair, just to illustrate this. But imagine you have a child who's 17 years old. Let's say that it's a child with autism, somebody in the spectrum. To my knowledge, nobody has ever died of autism. Okay, so let's say you get that special needs trust together, you get your estate plan together, you go to the best law firm around, you get it all done and signed, and then like you go to San Francisco, and I always tell folks, usually when they're talking about if I pass away, they say if I get hit by a bus, and by the way, if you go to San Francisco with Muni, that is entirely possible. So let's say you are hit by that Muni bus, and our clients never die, they mature, their trust mature. So let's say your trust matures, which means you're dead. Let's say your child is named Kathy, she's 17-year-old and otherwise healthy. That trust is going to last 70 years. Now, one of the things when we talk about Kathy, and a favorite saying for folks in the autism community is if you've met one person with autism, anybody know how to finish this? If you've met one person with autism, finish the sentence. You've met one person with autism, right? For me, it would be a lot simpler if they were all the same, but they're not. Okay, so we're talking about a full spectrum. Now, maybe Kathy is going to become the CEO of a big company and take care of their parents in the manner they become accustomed to. Wouldn't that be sweet? Let's just assume in this case that we know that Kathy's going to need some level of assistance for the rest of her life. So you come to the estate planning attorney to put this all together, to take care of Kathy, not just when you pass away, but keep this in mind. Most of you are your child's primary advocate, okay? So what if instead of the bus taking you out, you become part of the disability community and you're not able to fill that role? Well, you're pretty hard to replace. I mean, I'm just here to tell you, dollars and cents you're expensive to replace, but also finding somebody who understands the needs and can pick up where you left off. That's part of the plan here. So ideally, you set this up so you have it all in place about who's going to do it and all of that. And Kathy is otherwise healthy and is likely to live for 70 years. Now, I have been a student of deinstitutionalization for 60 years, and the things I have seen have blown my mind. You would never have conceived this. What's going to happen in the next 60 or 70 years? I have no idea, and neither do you. So here's the challenge. If we were doing the full program, I would go through the basics of public benefits. How many people think the SSI rules of the Medi-Cal rules will stay the same for the next 70 years? They're probably not going to stay the same for the next 7 months, okay? I mean, so to do a plan that's going to preserve things according to the rules in 2023, that's when we're recording this here, that's not really doing the job. We want to take into account benefits and that kind of thing, but we want to be flexible to change with inevitable changes. Social service systems will change. Let's say Kathy, instead of being autistic, is schizophrenic, okay? And let's say this happened in 1970. In 1970, there was virtually no money in the community for developmental disabilities. In fact, if you said developmental disabilities, nobody would know what you're talking about, right? For mental health, there was lots of money. My father worked in a program moving people out of state hospitals into the community. It was awash in cash. Where are those programs now? They collapsed, okay? So if you planned in 1970 that you see all these wonderful things going, and I don't really need to give Kathy a lot of assistance here, you would be so disappointed here to see what happened over the next couple of decades. For developmental disabilities, we have the best system despite its problems. Believe me, the Latterman system has its problems here, but can we guarantee that this system will continue for the next 70 years? Only if you guys can continue your advocacy here, but there is no guarantee. Her condition may change. Once again, folks with autism. I worked in the Northern California Autism Program in Napa, California in 1972. We had 100 patients. We were told that was the entire population of Northern California. There they were. Now, obviously, that doesn't line up with what we're dealing with right now. But then the other part of that is there's people in the spectrum. There's people with all sorts of disabilities doing things that I would never have conceived of, right? I had a parent call me in a panic 2 years ago that their son got a job at Google and is making $150,000 a year and is concerned that they're going to lose their SSI. And my answer was, I have 1,000 parents who would cut off their right arm to trade places with you, so if you're calling me for sympathy, you ain't gonna get it, right? Would I ever conceive that a person with autism could be making more money than my children? Not even a thing. Her advocacy system not only can change, it will change. You know, part of it is probably the greatest role you play in many ways is you are your child's advocate. Okay, now there are folks, I got a feeling Liz is one of those where we don't really need to advocate for Liz. She probably wouldn't appreciate it. She might hurt us if we tried. On the other hand, there's a lot of folks where you do need this advocacy. Because see, one of the things that drives me is that one of the reasons I left the state hospital system and got into doing civil rights is, you find this hard to believe, but working at Napa State Hospital, I saw a patient abuse and I did something really bad for my career. I turned in the staff member who did it, and then I did it a second time. Does that mean that people in the community cannot be abused? Oh, no. In fact, there are indications that the incidents of abuse are greater in the community than in the institutions. Okay, does that mean we should all go back to institutions? No, of course that doesn't mean. But part of it is not only advocating for services, but also being aware of those situations where the person might be physically abused, mentally abused, whatever. Once again, you guys are probably in tune to that kind of thing. And so oftentimes when we're looking at how we're going to set up a trust or a system that's going to provide for Kathy's needs, advocacy is a big part of it. It's more than keeping her on the SSI and keeping a roof over her head. Attitudes about disabilities have changed one way or the other, okay? So a lot of things for people with developmental disabilities, we've seen a lot of positive changes. On the other hand, through the polio epidemic, those of us that are old enough to remember that, which would be maybe 5 or 6 of us, I remember here, that was a terrifying situation and that affected folks. Anybody remember AIDS? Even I was a nurse. I wasn't sure I could touch my patient and not get the same thing. And attitudes certainly changed. They changed for the good, they changed for the better, for the good or for the worse. The amount of resources, we go back to this. I have a paper, if you want to, you can ask Amy to send it to you about how much should I put in my child special needs trust, a typical attorney thing. I take 6 pages to tell you, I have no freaking idea, okay? It really depends on the facts and circumstances, in Kathy's case, over the next 70 years. Okay, trustee options will change, okay? Now, single greatest issue, I have to just tell you, it's not the trust, it's the choice of trustees, end of game, okay? And it's not just whether that they're caring people, loving people, whatever. How many of you people remember your life before you had a child with a disability? And even if you put your hand up, I would challenge you that you are not the same person you were. Disability is a life-changing experience. Your attitudes have changed, your outlook has changed, everything has changed. You have gone through an experience that other people simply don't understand. You couldn't understand it unless you were living the challenge. The challenge. Okay, we'll work on that. So, once again, part of this is to make sure that not only do we have trustees who can do things in an efficient way, but really understand what it is we're trying to do. So, focusing on, well, we already did that. I'm even getting tired of it. The incapacity thing, we should touch on that once again. When you're doing your planning with your attorney, okay, a lot of times the focus is entirely on death planning, but consider this, and here's one of the issues that comes up, okay, is that, let's say I have a child with a disability. Let's say, as a former psych nurse, I am terrified of nursing homes. I worked in those places. Thank you very much. I would prefer not to go if there's any way to get around it. I do not have unlimited money. So the issue is, let's say that I were to get dementia, something along that line, where my needs are going up dramatically. I may need some long-term assistance myself or whatever. As Ed said, that let's say the disability community says, hey, Steve, come on in, the water's fine. I'm going, I don't really want to go, but let's say, that I become part of the disability. Now, here's the issue. I got myself to take care of, I got my wife to take care of, and I have a disabled child to take care of. My goodness gracious. I mean, it's a lot easier just to plain old die because the equation's really simple. But in that case, I got to be able to tell the trustee what kind of supports can we continue to provide for my child with a disability? What kind of supports, when you're looking at spending money, how much are you going to focus on me? And oh, by the way, I have a wife who probably insists that she needs to be cared for too. These are really difficult things to do, and these are the discussions you should have up here. So when we're talking about benefits, and I will be recording, we have on our website here, for those of you who haven't seen it, I'm pretty video happy. I got lots of videos here, some of them on public benefits. I'm about to redo the one on benefits in 2023. So when you're looking at benefits, even though we can expect them to change, a lot of this is based on public benefits. So just a real quick primer on this. When we're talking about benefits, we're talking about needs-based benefits, and those are things like SSI, Medi-Cal, which covers IHSS and things like that, food stamps, which we call SNAP, legal aid, utility payments, and housing subsidies, okay? These are based on showing a need based on disability and limited income and resource. That's why they call them needs-based programs. One of the things here is for SSI, and it's been this way forever, you can not have more than $2,000 in resources, stuff, and still stay qualified for the SSI, okay? Now the other part of this, and for many of you, this is going to happen. These are what are called the entitlements. So if your child was disabled before the age of 22, by definition, if it's a developmental disability, by definition, it had to be before the age of 21. So that's pretty easy. Your child will qualify for a program called Disabled Adult Child Benefits based on what you or the other parent has put in the system for Social Security. With that, with that program, we're talking about childhood disability benefits, but the other part of it, if you become disabled, once again, that's one of the disability programs. Or if your child gets enough quarters in that they qualify on their own, they may qualify for disability insurance benefits and Medicare. What's the difference here? You could win the lottery and still it's not going to affect qualifications for these benefits. These are entitlements. Once you get them, you're entitled to them. They're much friendlier programs, okay? And they're all very different. So part of it is understanding that and making sure the folks you work with understand it too and are not applying these rules to these situations. One of the big things you see all the time is that SSI is literally for food, clothing, and shelter. In 2005, they took away the clothing limitation, and with a little luck, in fact, I'm 90% sure by the end of the year, they're going to take away the food part. But we still have the situation where if your child does not pay their fair share of their rent, for where they're getting a little over $1,000 a month, how are you going to do that in the San Francisco Bay Area? The answer is, I don't know. Here, then there's all sorts of rules if you help them with housing. The rules are not the same over here. They're entirely different rules. So it's one of these things where these things are relatively complex. On the other hand, for many folks, for instance, losing their Medi-Cal is unthinkable, especially if you need attendant care and that kind of thing. So part of it is understanding the benefits. As far as what a resource is, that $2,000 resource limit, anything you can convert into cash is a resource. And when you're on SSI, if your resources exceed $2,000, and what it literally says in the POMs, in the regulations, is on the first moment of the first day of the calendar month, you will lose your eligibility for benefits, okay? Now, once again, this puts a lot of pressure on folks, especially as we get into ABLE and that kind of thing, and working, here is like, how do you make that work? By the way, that number was set in 1989, and if we had the most conservative cost of living increase, that number should be somewhere between 18 and 22,000. 2,000 is ridiculous, right? Here, that's not even enough to buy a spinnaker on my sailboat, which, by the way, a lot of folks with disabilities don't have sailboats, so they don't have spinnakers, but that's okay. Both ABLE and accounts and SNTs can be used to do this. So like a general overview of trust, and we're done at 3, right? Okay, I want to leave enough for ABLE. Okay, so trust. Trusts seem like these mysterious things. They're really not that mysterious. All a trust is a contract to do something. There's all sorts of different kinds of trusts. There's charitable trusts, insurance trusts, there's family limited partnerships and all that. The 2 kinds of trusts we know more than anything else here is, for instance, a revocable living trust. For any of you that own a house, if you don't have one, you should do a revocable living trust and put the house in the revocable living trust. Why should you do that beyond the fact that I need the business? The reason you should do that is that if your house passes by will or intestacy, it's subject to probate. But a revocable living trust is a contract where you put the house in the trust, and then you say, upon my incapacity or death, this is what I want you to do with the house. And so you can say, I want the house to pass to my child, I want the house to pass to my disabled child, I want the house to pass to my special needs trust, but you can direct it by a contract. Since things are passing by a contract, they don't go through probate. That's why you do them. What is a special needs trust? Okay, so Social Security defines a resource, as we just went through, as cash or any item that an individual owns or can get their bloody little hands on. Okay, so I worked a number of years for Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. That's where I got to meet Ed Roberts and a lot of, and Judy, not who I spent less time with, but obviously a great person who passed away and has passed a legacy to us. All of these East Bay people, right? And so my job was to enable disabled people to be as independent as possible and have control of their life. But then here's my problem. If somebody here has SSI, and up until recently, Medi-Cal, the rules have changed. Did I mention rules change? Rules change. But the $2,000 resource rule says that if somebody can get their hands on more than $2,000, then they lose their benefits and everything collapses. So how can I help that person be independent with these crazy rules out there? So if an SSI recipient does not own an asset outright and is legally restricted from directing it, it's not a resource. So let me tell you, and in all cases, I have identified 7 attorneys who claim they invented the Special Needs Trust, and one just passed away. I did not invent it. As I like to say, when the last one passes away, then I can say I invented it because nobody can question me, but I didn't invent it. But we just had another pass away. So what did they do? Because they all did this all at the same time. They read these same rules and go, how can I take assets and make them unavailable? I know what I'll do. I'll create what's called an irrevocable spendthrift trust, okay? What is an irrevocable spendthrift trust? It's a trust, it's a document, it's a contract. And what this literally, and where spendthrift trust came from, ladies, you may not like this, but there was a time when obviously you would never leave your spouse money. What would she do with it? That was a long time ago. Okay, and so what you would do is you would set up a spendthrift trust to take care of the little lady, because I'm a really good guy here, and then the trustee would have sole and absolute discretion to take care of her here to buy all those other things. And so the trustee has absolute discretion and she has none, and then I can put whatever rules I want on it. That kind of went out the window in the 1900s, where they had this amendment, 19th Amendment to the Constitution, where apparently there were some women that just weren't wild about this whole thing. So, we get into the whole thing, but historically, it came from how we used to take care of our wives to make sure the little lady's taken care of. I mean, maybe those were the good old days, maybe those were awful days, but those are not today's day. right? So it's the same thing with the special needs trust. What they created was a spendthrift trust. And keep this in mind, okay? We're trying to enable a person to be as independent as possible. And yet what we're going to do is set up a contract where the trustee has sole and absolute discretion. I am the trustee for 250 beneficiaries. I have sole and absolute discretion. The beneficiaries can make the most reasonable request under the sun, and I can deny it, and there's nothing they can do about it. Therefore, it's not a resource to them, and they stay qualified for their SSI. Anybody see a problem with that? I mean, and in some cases, like we do have folks who need a lot of protection from themselves. So there might be situations where maybe that's the objective, but normally that's not really the objective. So the thing we're looking at is we're creating this contract where the trustee has sole and absolute discretion and can basically deny any distribution, and that's how they can stay qualified for SSI. I actually have a client that owns part of a sports stadium that's in a special needs trust. You go, why would you do that beyond the fact that you can? Here, well, it's because there were some essential benefits they needed that were only provided by Medi-Cal, so that's what we did. If you have a sports stadium, come on over, let's put it into the special needs trust and see what happens. We can put almost anything in the trust and make it not available by giving all the power to the trustee and none to the beneficiary. Now, we're talking about estate planning trust today, and the lingo is that this is called a third-party trust. There's a first-party trust where the money is from the disabled individual. That's like from a lawsuit. There's a third-party trust. I don't know what the second-party trust is. I've never figured that out. But they can have a lot of latitude. You can write these special needs trusts to do all sorts of things. You can set it up so it'll turn on and off. Oftentimes we'll have beneficiaries that can work, and maybe there's a period of time when they really don't need the benefits. Then there's periods of time when they do. I mean, it's all over the board. And upon your death, you can leave whatever is left over in that trust to anybody else without any lien, except you can't leave it to the drafting attorney because the state bar really frowns on that kind of thing, unless you adopt me, okay? So we can see what we can do with that. But there's a lot of latitude, so don't be limited by a lot of preconception. What you really want to look at is, what is it I want to accomplish? For instance, a big thing is that employment. Now, when I was a young nurse, the whole idea of a person with a disability working was like, well, why would they do that? I mean, it just didn't even equate. It wouldn't even make any sense, right? Well, today, working employment for many, if it's possible, is the avenue to independence. I mean, that kind of thing up here. So I'm drafting more trusts that are saying, yeah, I want to preserve the public benefits, but I'm really more interested in Junior, in you providing that support here, both in care management and also in dollars and cents to help my son or daughter with their vocational needs. It's like any parent with a kid. I have the same discussion with my kids. Go get a damn job. I'm not going to support you for the rest of my life. That's how you're going to become independent, and that's how I'm going to become more independent too. So the process of creating an estate plan, and I'm kind of going through how we do it. Once again, in all honesty, and I mean this, I want you to be able to apply this wherever you go, okay? So part of this is we look at it as a 4-step process, okay? The first one is, I know sometimes I think you kind of got in your mind, I got to go do a conservatorship, which we covered in the first hour, which is not necessarily so. And I got to do a special needs trust when my kid turns 18, okay? We covered the conservatorship, which is put some thought into it, and we don't need to conserve everybody. That's not what we need to do. But the other part of it is, when we're doing this kind of planning, is what is it we want to accomplish? And don't assume the trustee is going to know, whether it's a family member, professional, or whatever. Is it vocational? Is it safety? There's many folks with disabilities here that are very vulnerable. Is it care management? What is it? What is it you want this trust to do? Okay? And if all the trust says is keep my child qualified for public benefits, that's, for most families, that's not really the objective, right? That's the tool. And I'm not saying we don't want to keep that, but then the next one is a management system or a way that we're going to manage this. Choose the trustee, okay? Well, the next thing is you can have a really good trust that says this is what I want for junior and all of that, both in letters of intent and in the trust document itself, which will show something in a minute about how that works. But you got to put something in the trust or it's not going to go very far at all. As I've mentioned a couple of times, how much should you put in? My prejudice is figure out what you think it is and do your best to double it. I don't know. I will make this mention, and I don't mean this if there's financial advisors in the room. I am an attorney. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not qualified to give advice about insurance, but that's not going to stop me here. Look at, most of you guys are relatively young, okay? So, you know, like whatever the number is, it's probably a big number, okay? But on the other hand, term insurance is relatively inexpensive. Now, here's what an insurance professional will tell you, which is true. Most term insurance, you're not going to collect on it. The insurance companies, they don't build those big buildings because they're a nonprofit organization that just really care about you. I'm sorry, Snoopy doesn't care about you either. They're into profit. Okay, that's what they're into. But the thing about it is that in many cases, you could buy a relatively inexpensive term policy that might be good for 10 or 20 years at least, so you could sock away other assets and that kind of thing. And the other part of that is if you are a couple here, don't buy a second to die policy. Buy a policy on the husband and buy a policy on the wife. Because many times when one spouse passes away, then it's going to put a huge burden on the other spouse, not only for the normal stuff, but also, you know, we have one caregiver gone, whatever. You need to think about what are those periods where you're going to need that extra cash. In my world, it's while the child is growing up and probably up until age 40. There's no magic about it, but you're going through the transition years now and that sort of thing here. Now, odds are that you are going to live past 40. The insurance companies know that. That's why the insurance is so cheap. But man, if you really need it, that's money well spent. Just something to consider. Otherwise, funding can come from all sorts of different places. It can come from you. It can come from your retirement plans. It can come from family members. I have a niece with Down syndrome. Family is not wealthy here. All the aunts and uncles, we of course did a special needs trust, and all the aunts and uncles are leaving something to my niece because we care about her, right? And you'll find that oftentimes we see trust funded by grandparents. The last thing is, and this is true with anything when you're dealing with disability advocacy, does that mean we're all done and we have no more work to do? That's never true. I'm sorry, because things change. So we need to have some system where not just during your lifetime, but over the lifetime of your child, that document needs to re-look at itself and ask itself, am I relevant? Did the laws change? Did situations change? Did opportunities change? We try to project as best as we can for Kathy as our example here of what are the challenges that are coming up and how are we going to meet them here. We can't always nail it all the time. So we must always have a way to look at the document about how are we going to make it relevant. So let's just run through a few slides on it. As far as expressing your intent, not only do you need to clearly express your intent, and do not assume that family, even siblings, totally understand your challenge and your wishes. You might think it's obvious. It's not as obvious as you might think. With that, once again, if you have a bare bones trust, I actually had a trustee who would not pay for vocational needs because the trust itself said that your job is to keep him on public benefits. And the reasoning was, well, if I help him, he won't need the SSI any longer, and therefore I'm breaking the the commands of the trust. And I'm just thinking, well, that is effing stupid here. But I mean, literally, that's what it said. It wasn't a logical thing to say. And I don't think that this trustee, who's not evil, but really understood that, did I mention that working for many folks with disabilities is the true avenue to independence, right? And so we don't want to limit that if that's possible. But don't assume. So you might want to be really clear about how you're going to do that. How are you going to do that? Well, there's two ways of doing it. You can put general information in the trust. Don't get down to the program or that sort of thing. You might want to say that I want to make sure that Erica has a recreational thing she needs. Like, for instance, she loves Disney World. She's on the East Coast. We're out here at Disneyland, right? I mean, it's a universal thing, right? They want to make sure that that's there. She also is vulnerable, safety, whatever. You're talking about a half a page, maybe, of what's important. Actually, in her family, involvement with the church is an important part of their life. Now, it's not okay to put in the trust that if you don't believe in Jesus, you don't get any distributions. That's not okay. But it is okay to say that the church of the local diocese, and by the way, this is from somebody who's barely Methodist, so maybe you guys can correct me later, but that's an important part of the community in her life. And the reason that that's important isn't necessarily for the spiritual part, but it's part of being part of that community. As long as she wants to be part of that community, trustee, I want you to support that. That is perfectly okay. It might have to do with any number of things, global. With that, you can have a letter of intent. Sometimes we call them different things, but it's a side letter. So it basically references where you can get right down to the details. Like, I really like EBI. I very much like that program. Please continue with that program as best we can. I like this doctor. I don't like that doctor. There might be some other things. There might be some medical things, like, don't give Kathy phenothiazines, because the last time she did that, she had an EPS that you wouldn't believe. And if anybody who's ever knows what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, that kind of direction. That kind of information you could do in a letter of intent. You don't want to put it in the main trust. But if we don't give that direction, how's the trustee going to know what they're supposed to do? Now, we'll do this quick because I do want to get to the ABLE Act. Here, the trustee. I have been looking for this character for quite a long time. And I'll just let you know, I don't think the person exists. If you were looking for the actually, there's one other thing with the ideal trustee. The ideal trustee wouldn't charge what goes. That's not on the list here. But, this trustee has incredible discretion over whether they can spend anything or not. So we want to make sure we have somebody who really understands what's in the best interest of Kathy. We want to have somebody who understands public benefits, and not only how to maximize the benefits, but there are times when the benefits are more harmful than good, and there's times when it's best just to give them up. I have seen people go to extremes to preserve $10 or $20 worth of SSI when the consequences are nothing. I've had folks who've gone to extremes to preserve $10 worth of SSI where the loss of it would be devastating. And it doesn't mean the trustee has to understand this. There are people that, like care managers, we have a group called NCA we hire all the time to try to work out when should we preserve the benefits or not, but not just to blindly protect them. Investments. Anybody's 401k go down recently? Mine did here, and I'm in conservative investments. But part of it is properly investing these funds for the long term and making sure that the investments make sense. Once again, if you have, for lack of a better term, a typical child and a child with a disability, if the typical child loses their inheritance, they got a lot more options out there. Your child with a disability, if this money's lost, you're going to have a hard time getting it back. So we need to make sure that whoever's doing the investments here, that it makes sense for the long term. Keeping books, especially when they're on SSI, these things get audited from time to time, and you have to be able to answer back to the agencies about what did you use these things for. I think this is really important. Once again, that advocacy. Now, I used to work with a lot of folks that were nonverbal with serious medical issues. But I want to tell you, and you guys tell me if this isn't so, when you get in touch with the behaviors of that individual, like for instance, if I went to somebody's bed and they never did this before, and I walk over there to put my hand on their forehead and they put their hands up like that, what are they telling me? Somebody hit them, right? Is everybody going to, I mean, like, for those of you who have children that are nonverbal, when behaviors change, doesn't it scream out to you that maybe you don't know exactly what's wrong, but you know something's wrong? Because even nonverbal people communicate, maybe by doing this, right? Well, we need to make sure we have somebody who is really in touch to this and in touch to these situations. Statistically, especially when we're talking about severely disabled folks, you are technically safer in a state hospital than a community program. Does that mean we should move them into state hospitals? Absolutely not. Couldn't do it if we wanted to, right? But on the other hand, we must always be vigilant. I know I used to work in level 4 group homes, and we would have times when we would talk to staff about how frustrating this job is sometime, and we go through a process. We'll do it here. How many in this room have ever wanted to strangle a person with a disability? No, I know nobody wants to put their hands up, but I know you're not being truthful. There's a difference between wanting to do it and doing it. I'm here to tell you, and for the camera, strangling disabled people is not a good thing to do. Getting in touch with your feelings, because if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, and I mean, I'm playing with the strangle thing, but if you're starting to have thoughts that you're not comfortable with, your brain is telling you something like, Junior, you need to take yourself out of this situation. It's getting to be too much. I need some help, right? Or maybe I need to go to a different unit, or maybe I need a different job. But as a parent, they don't give you that option, do they, right? But the same thing about it is, sometimes we need to be honest with ourselves. These are not the easiest folks to deal with. And I would love to tell you that I have never wanted to strangle a disabled person here, but you need to be in touch with this and really realize that this is not an easy population, right? And that we're all human. And we need to always be vigilant for those situations, because there's never, don't get me wrong, there's never an excuse for that kind of behavior, but it happens all the time. And if we tell ourselves that it's not happening, we are just lying to ourselves. Here's the hard part. You got to be immortal. Now, I am 71. Let's say you wanted to choose me to be Kathy's trustee. What would that make me, 140? I don't know what. I don't do math. I'm an attorney here. Anyway, I probably would be a bad choice, right? On the other hand, like if you choose a professional trustee, you want to ask them what is their succession plan and that kind of thing. So I happen to be the trustee of a pool trust, which, by the way, doesn't shut down when I do. It's got to go on, and there are successor trustees. It's the same thing. We've got banks. We've got, in this area, I'm really sad that is there a professional fiduciary in this room? That is so sad. We need to get professional fiduciaries in the room. But we have some very good professional fiduciaries in the area that serve as trustees and that kind of thing. But you need to have a succession plan of some sort. And it may not be a particular individual. It may be a group. It may be changes over time, whatever. But we got to be realistic. So with that, real quick, because of time, I'll go you through what we have, and the system we have. Jennifer and I, those of you that met Jennifer, I have to tell you, she's the most incredible attorney here. We advise on what's called the Elder Council and Wealth Council Special Needs Trust. So probably about a third of you, if you go out and get a special needs trust, we probably wrote the software program or at least advised on it. And so this is incorporated in all of this. So one thing we tend to like to do, and this may be counterintuitive, is my prejudice. Let me go back. There's a bunch of things we call in the office Daleisms, one of which is simple and disability are two words that don't go together, right? Or the other one is whenever somebody says all disabled people must fill in the blank, that's a wrong statement, just to begin with, because it's a very diverse community. And they're all different, and all the situations are different. It would be easier if they were all the same. It would make my job a cinch, but that's not how it works, right? So part of this with this is that more often than not, siblings get named as trustees, okay? Now, this is my prejudice. For instance, here's an exception to the rule. Jennifer happens to be the trustee of her sister's trustee, or of her sister's special needs trust. I think she's pretty qualified to do the job here and has the temperament and the whole thing. But it's not just her commitment, she has the knowledge. The problem with it is oftentimes when you name siblings, there's two things that come up. One is, first off, ask them if they really want to do it, okay? Because I'll give you an example with my niece Erica. She has one, and this is typical of siblings. We have one sister that if you ask her, do you want to be the trustee for your sister? She's going to go, hell no. I went all the way through school. I had my developmentally disabled sister by my side all the time. I love her and all that. But at this point, I just want to be the sister. I don't want to be the keeper, right? It doesn't mean she doesn't love her. It's just like, it's unnatural for one sibling to oversee another sibling. Now, the other sibling got a master's in special education, so she certainly bit the bullet there, right? But on the other hand, she has a very active family that she's taking care of. So my prejudice is think long and hard before you make a sibling the trustee. And it's not that there's not a role for the sibling. There certainly is. But on the other hand, here's a model that I think kind of works. We might have a professional trustee, okay? And just because I'm not going to go through the next slide, going through different models. That trustee could be a bank, okay? It could be Wells Fargo. There's actually a division with Wells Fargo that does a good job. I don't know if there's any Wells Fargo professionals in here, but it's kind of hard to be an adult and to have never had a problem with Wells Fargo or Bank of America. That's just the same company name. It doesn't have to do with the company, it's the people that are serving there. And also, people change, right? It could be Fremont Bank handles these things. Might go that direction. There are private professional fiduciaries. About a 5-minute drive from here is Kairos Fiduciary, which is a private professional fiduciary company here, and the owner happens to have a child in the spectrum, right? And they work as a private professional fiduciary. There's Meredith Taylor here in the area who serves this community. So you might have a private professional fiduciary. It might be a pooled trust. I am the trustee of the Golden State Pooled Trust. There are other pooled trusts. There's different options. So we might say the trustee would be, let's say we're focused on a Kairos fiduciary. So the trustee upon my death might be Kairos fiduciary or a private professional fiduciary, corporate trustee, or pooled trust of an advisory committee's choosing. Okay, sounds good. With the advisory committee, who's the advisory committee? And this is a lot like supported decision making. In fact, for those of you that are interested in supported decision making, let's say we're talking about Erica. Erica's a good example. Erica, if in a lot of cases, if you ask her to make a decision, she's going to look at you blankly like, why are you talking to me? On the other hand, if you engage her with the family and she talks with them and they work with the family and she gets the information she needs, she can make an informed decision. She can do it, right? Here. So it's the same thing. You could have an advisory committee with the siblings, for instance, maybe aunts and uncles, whatever. You could even do this under the advisement of Erica. Erica can't be involved, but it doesn't mean, Erica can't be in charge, but it doesn't mean that she can't be involved. And in a lot of cases, if we want Erica's wishes to be a very big focus, the advisory committee is a really good way to do it. They advise the trustee on what needs to be done and that kind of thing. They also have the power to hire and to fire the trustee if the trustee isn't doing the work. So for instance, if Erica makes a reasonable request, the advisory committee signs off here, and the trustee says no, well, the next thing is, let's replace the trustee. You should always be able to replace your advisors, whether they're a financial advisor, a trustee, or even an attorney, right? Anybody that's got a job for life, that's a problem. With this model, this has a care manager. Now, there's different care manager groups and that kind of thing. We have professional care managers. Most of the care managers are work with seniors, but about half of those have experience with folks with disabilities. There's different levels. EBI has a program called Life Trust Care, where they do care management, private trust, and that kind of thing. And what they can do is advise on what are the needs that Erica might have, so they can make a decision and the trustee can fulfill them. Quick question?
Yes. Can you please repeat the sentence when you start saying always, we can always be able to replace the advice?
We can always replace the trustee. So here's what this advisory committee is going to do, and I think this is a more rational thing for a family. We might have the siblings, like even in this case, even with the sister who doesn't want to be the keeper, she's happy to be the advisor, right? So think about it, it's almost like supported decision making. Doesn't it kind of smell like that? Here, you can incorporate that into that about what is it we're going to use the money for, what are our objectives, and that kind of thing. So they can direct the trustee, they can hire and fire the trustee, they can also hire care managers to advise on that. So let's just say she's in California. They don't, and the sisters are in New York, okay? Well, they don't understand the language system, so they might hire a group like EBI or that sort of thing to do advisement on this here. In that way, we kind of have a system of checks and balances here where we can look at how are we going to provide those objectives and make sure that the most vulnerable person in my family, Erica, is not only going to have a voice in this, but to make sure that this is going to evolve to the many changes. By the way, Erica is in her mid-40s, and we're learning with folks with Down syndrome. We never knew this before. They got something that sure looks a lot like autism, not autism, Alzheimer's. I don't want to make an ageism joke here, but you're right here. And it's like, so her needs are going to evolve. You have a question back there, ma'am? Or you're just shaking your hand? Okay, well, never mind. Quick.
Yeah, so the advisory committee, are they professional people?
They can be. Usually, maybe there might be one, but usually, no.
Or could it be the other siblings? Like if my child has other, like 3 other siblings?
It could be other siblings. There's different variations of this. Sometimes the care manager is part of the advisory committee. Sometimes they're separate, right? There could be a professional on there, and part of what we're doing at the Golden State Pool Trust. And I'm going to make a little pitch, whether you use this or not. And I'm not here to try to pitch the trust, but we do a lot of education, and we try to get parents to think about how are you going to put something together that works for your child, because your needs are going to be different than his needs, right? I mean, just the way it goes. And your resources, both financial and personal. I would tell you, when I sit down, well, I actually don't do planning myself anymore. When Christy and Jennifer in my office sit down with a client, they'll ask, well, what are your natural sports family, right? And we get some family where we need 2 or 3 pages. We get some families where you get a blank look, because it's very common when especially when somebody has a severe disability, they have one child, and a problem that happens oftentimes is they become disconnected with the rest of the community. They become isolated, and so sometimes you literally get a blank stare looking back at you. And it seems like it's one extreme or the other, and we have to work with what we have. So if you don't have not only siblings or the natural support family that can do it, but can do it well, right? You don't want to be putting names in here just for the sake of doing it. You want to do it because hopefully they care about your child, but also they bring some sort of skill set to this. You got to fit it to the situation. That's what makes it fun and terrifying. I am going to jump through this. The rest of it you can look at. Let's talk a little bit about the ABLE Act. Okay. How many of you folks have opened up a CalAble or an Able account? Okay, so we have, it's a good amount. Okay, now, and by the way, anything I say, especially Dante, if you hear this, I am a supporter of the Able Act. Are there problems? Uh, Don't listen. Yes. Okay, but there we go. Once again, there are problems with everything. What are you gonna do? So it basically, as we go through this, it's part of the tax code. It actually comes under the same thing as a 529 plan, which is an education savings plan. It has some similarities, it has more differences, but here's the cool thing. It's administered under the IRS, and it may be hard for you to believe this. The IRS traditionally is a disability-friendly organization. For the rest of us, we're toast. But, I mean, actually, some of the things they've done and some of the cases when there's a disabled person, it's astounding how they'll bend over backwards to help them. The rest of us, we're on our own, okay? But it does create this tax savings advantage program. I'm not going to get into it. The tax savings part borders on silly, but I mean, once again, for those of you who are on SSI, how many of you actually have them doing tax returns? Other than you should this year because there's all sorts of credits. It keeps the money safe and it's not counted as a resource. It's not part of that $2,000 resource. If it's spent on qualified disability expenses, and we have to put it up there because that's what the law says, that's actually not true. You can spend it on anything you want, and the IRS does not care. But you should still follow the rules because, well, you should. In the right situation, it can give a level of freedom because the problem with it oftentimes, especially with the special needs trust, is the trustee has sole and absolute discretion and the beneficiary has none. So who's eligible? And this changed because Amy put it up there. Currently, you have to show that you're disabled before the age of 26. Now, once again, for this crowd, not a problem because by definition, you have to be disabled before the age of 18. You have to meet the eligibility criteria of SSI, SSDI, whatever. That is not a height. Or if you're not getting benefits, you have to be ready to certify that if you needed to, you would get a doctor's order telling you what everybody already knows, that the person's disabled and has got challenges. By the way, to my knowledge, they have never once asked for the certification. It doesn't mean that you should lie about it, but on the other hand. By the way, the age limitation is going to up to 46 here in 2026. So, yeah. You can put a total, well, let's start from the bottom. You can put in whatever the amount is that qualifies for a gift tax exemption for crazy wealthy people. So for any of you that have more than $20 million, that affects you. For the rest of us, I don't have 20 million. That doesn't make any difference. 17,000 a year. We're going to see in a minute that you can't put more in if you're working. If the amount goes over $100,000 in the ABLE account and you're on SSI, the SSI goes into suspension. It's not eliminated here. And keep in mind, in a lot of cases, by the time it gets up to that, if you're putting money in it, they may not be on SSI anyway, because upon your retirement, disability, or death, your child is likely to be on a program called Child with Disability Benefits anyway, if you're getting Social Security. So it may or may not affect you. And the most you can put into an ABLE account is $529,000 if you use California's program, which is going to take a whole lot of $17,000 before somebody maxes that out. Now, the vast amount of cases we're dealing with, I'll get you in a minute here, are money in, money out accounts. I mean, we'll go through how we use them in a minute, but in most of them, we're not using it really as a savings account. We're using it for other things. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, thanks for your patience. A contribution by an outside person to the SSI recipient's ABLE account
is not counted as income. So like, here's the thing that comes up, and this is always, I as an attorney and also as a trustee, I got to stick to the rules. I can't space them out. So the problem you run into, like with Erica, let's say you want to give her a $500 a gift, $500 in cash, or you're going to be doing it under the table, which is called welfare fraud here. I mean, I wouldn't lose sleep over it, but if you give cash to a person on SSI, she's required to report it. Let's say you put it, she happens to have a stable account with the Ohio program. Let's say you put the $500 in the stable account, then it's not counted as income and she can use that money as she pleases. But if you give the money to her, she's required to report it to SSI, and they're going to reduce her benefits by $480. They don't count the first $20. Now, most people are just going to do it under the table, but you don't really have to. You can use it for gifts, right? Because one of the problems always had been is that you could never, no longer have it more than $2,000 in resources the person could control, with some exceptions here. But now, once again, you can put up to $17,000 a year in that, and hopefully we get to this before I run out of time. But if you work, you could put in about $13,000 of the person's earning into the ABLE account as well. Because see, that was always the problem with people working. They would work, they would earn money, and then when they get over-resourced, then they'd have to spend the money on stupid stuff rather than saving it for their future. By the way, if you put it in from earnings, it's still income, but at least you can save it for the future. Yes, ma'am.
Is that the owner of the ABLE account, their income?
We are going to get to that in a minute. Okay, so if the beneficiary, we don't care about the 100,000. A couple of things about it, and you can read most of this here later, is you can only use it for cash. Here, you can only have one account. I mean, that's kind of the fine print. So let's go back to this. Let's go back to Erica. I want to give her $500, okay? Now, and the other part about it is the account can be set up by the disabled person themselves, parents, conservators, siblings have been added, and who am I missing? The rep payee. There's a limited amount of people that can set it up. The presumption is if the person is competent, because that they are to be in control. And the other one is, this is not a presumption. The minute the money hits that account, that's Erica's money, okay? But you can put the money in the account without giving her income, because like I said, if I gave her the $500, that's not going to work. The minute it goes into the account, it immediately becomes her money. And unless she's not competent, and Erica is challenged, but she's not incompetent. I mean, once again, can she express her opinions? She's from New York. I wish there's times she wouldn't, but she does, and she's very New York. I'm here to tell you. She will tell you to screw off. Not the happy, jolly, she's not to the stereotypes. I'm just here for you. So it can be made from any person. It can come from anywhere. It can come from grandma, grandpa. It can come from any trust. So where the money comes from is pretty broad. Yes, sir.
But it excludes Medi-Cal?
It doesn't affect Medi-Cal either.
Okay, but I saw a sentence on the slide.
Yeah,
that said
and the
Medi-Cal.
thing is, he said that might affect medical.
It might in some situations. In California, it's not. So it's not going to affect Medi-Cal if it goes directly into the account. And the other thing, because of time, because I can't get deep in the woods, they just changed the rules for Medi-Cal. For the kind of Medi-Cal you use for IHSS, which is you can now have up to $130,000 in assets and still qualify for Medi-Cal. So things do change. Question real quick.
Yeah, see, I have a special needs trust for my son. I have a first party that we set up when his dad died, a third party as well, through you guys. And I'm just wondering if there's any reason, I can't see any reason to start a
Well, I'll get to that real soon. Okay, let me just get through a few things. So when it's a gift, a contribution, it's not income to the beneficiary, right? I mean, that's, and by the way, it could come from a trust. We're going to get to that. And there's a rollover thing that's not worth it. A QDE real quick, just so we can get to the sizzle. A QDE is a qualified disability exemption. If you actually read the law, and why you would, I have, there's a whole long list of what you can use it for and what you can't use it for. But when they were writing the regulations, there was some dictum that says, well, a qualified disability expense. is anything that enhances the beneficiary's life. And the folks who run these things said, oh, well, that's good. We like that better. So now if you look at a QDE, it says anything that enhances the person's life, including these other things. So what does not enhance somebody else's life? And the only thing we can come up with is illegal drugs and gambling. That's pretty, and by the way, in order to get caught, your child would have to be audited by the IRS. And the chance of that is greater than zero, but it's not very high. And what it actually tells the Social Security workers is they are not to review the expenditures from these trusts no matter what. To answer your question, since I'm going to really try to finish on time, so maybe we'll just jump on this. You can tie it to a special needs trust. When would you do that and when would you wouldn't? And I know you're a client and I should know this, but I don't. Is that a court-monitored trust or not a court-monitored trust? Okay, so you can make distributions from the trust directly to enhance the life. Otherwise, what's the point of doing the trust at all here? The problem with it is, we'll go back to this. I am the trustee of the Golden State Pool Trust. For folks who do not have an ABLE account, I have to review every single expenditure, because if I have an expenditure that says, we went down to Target and spent $100 on Erica, and we get audited, IRS wants to go, not IRS, Social Security wants to know, $500 for what? What did you buy, right? And so now we got to go through that. So now I know what feminine hygiene deodorant she uses, stuff that is, believe me, for a Methodist male, these are things I don't want to know, I'm not interested in. And, once again, it might be nice if she had a little privacy, without, the trustee having to go through everything. So one thing with an ABLE account is it has two things for trust that work really well. One is you can give somebody discretionary money to be able to use as they are. So Erica could go out and buy things without me having to review them, which is good for her, because what the Social Security says is when the money goes into that account, with a very few exceptions, do not review it, which means I don't have to be so paranoid. The next good thing about tying it to a trust is housing. We got this crazy thing that if you pay for housing, you'll take a $325 reduction if you assist your child with housing if you pay for their housing directly. An example might be, let's say that your child lives in your house, and let's say the fair share of living in your house, let's say there's 4 people in the house, and there's a way to calculate this, the household expenditures of $4,000. Erica's share of that is $1,000, which is about every dollar of her SSI. That doesn't even count here in cases food, which she likes to eat, go figure, and that kind of thing. So it doesn't work. So it ends up if you as the parent says, well, that's okay, don't pay me. Social Security, don't pay me a fair market rate. They'll go, cool, you're assisting your child. We're going to penalize her SSI by $325. And you're going, say what? So you're penalizing me because I'm helping my disabled child with housing. Yes, they are. I mean, if that isn't the dumbest thing in the world, what is? What if instead you put $1,000 a month on her ABLE card? It instantly goes from being the trust money to her money, and then you use that to pay the rent. She just paid the rent with her own money, which means she doesn't take that $325 reduction. Does it work here, Amy? Because you're living the challenge.
I'm leaving the challenge.
Yes.
I have done this little nailing, and my son was still living at home. I did the ABLE account transfer and got rid of the ISM reduction.
The three, right. And they just put their arms around you and just helped you so much,
Yeah,
and
when
it was warm and fuzzy.
When I went in there the first time and told them that, they said, who's funding the special needs? Who's funding the ABLE account? And I said, we are. And they said, oh, well, you can't do that. Parents aren't allowed to fund the ABLE account. And I said, well, that's not what the rules say. And they said, well, here, sign this affidavit saying who's funding the account, and we'll have someone review it. So I said, fine, and I signed it. I attached the Tom's legislation, send it in. Oh, we'll get back to you in a couple days. It took me, I had to go back to them 3 different times, and they kept telling me the same thing. Finally, I said, I need to talk to a supervisor. They finally bumped it up to a supervisor, agreed with me, and my son got reimbursed $300, whatever it was at the time, $300-ish for the past 4 months, and ever since that, then, which was 3 years ago, he gets $300 more in his SSI check every month. So it adds up.
So,
Also pay rent.
right, but that's what she did. Because she took her money, turned it into his money, and he paid the rent.
And then he pays me, and then I take his money, and I just kind of put it back in his able.
Just to finish up quickly, because I think, aren't we, what are
We're
we?
supposed to be done at 3.
So just one more thing. Another reason why you might tie an able account to a special needs trust. Let's go back to Erica. Erica's been on SSI her entire life. Her parents really didn't put in the system. She'll never be on DAX. She's going to be on SSI the rest of her life. And so when we first got the able account, we decided we would use it to teach financial literacy. How's that for a cool term? Which is, Erica has never spent 1 red cent on herself her entire lifetime. And you know, we hear this all the time. A lot of folks with disabilities, you give them an opportunity to make expenditures, and they do really stupid things, just like everybody else, right? Well, how do we learn? So we started transferring, not 17,000. I am not giving her access to 17,000. Not a thing. $200 or $300. Okay. First thing she buys is little boys' clothes, and we're kind of going, why did you buy? And so we started off with absurd. Then we went to questionable, and then we went to, this is starting to make sense. But you know, the thing about it is, this is a common thing with folks with disabilities. Why would you expect them to be able to pay bills and do things like that when we never give them the opportunities? We train them to be dependent on us. Well, if that's not what rings your chimes, an able account, whether you use a special needs trust or something else, is a nice, safe way to do it. Here, because you could feed it a little bit. Now, the other things you can use it for that I think are very useful is for somebody who has, one of our concerns with her, for instance, is that she does have capacity, but we could imagine if there was a ton of money in that, something horrible would happen to that money here, because I don't think she has the barriers. In fact, we discovered that if she has a California ABLE card, that's just like throwing money on the ground, right? Just safety is a big thing. So we're not going to be loading that thing up. But let's say instead it was something like more of a physical disability, or even it could be somebody in the spectrum who has challenges, but we feel can do it. Then I could see building it up, because it's really good for employment, right? That's always been a barrier, and this allows people to save more. It's good for training. It's good for any number of things. Other than that, unless there's an objective, I wouldn't open a Cal-Able account just for the sake of doing it. As much as they need your assistance, you really got to think it through. The other thing with the ABLE account, real quick, and then we will officially close. I'll take a few questions here. But the other thing with the ABLE account is you have to think about succession, okay? Because let's say instead Erica doesn't have capacity, we're setting up for other things. Well, what the law says is that it could be under it could be controlled by a number of people with signature authority, but if she doesn't have capacity, it could be that if we don't have somebody that could do it, the last thing that we're stuck with is we might have to have a conservatorship. So like in her situation, let's say it's just the parents. In fact, in this case, dad's passed away. Let's say it's mom, and mom passes away. If there isn't somebody who's qualified to take over that account, it's going to force us to do a conservatorship and be under court supervision. And this is a thing where, like, if you're an attorney, you don't ask a question if you don't know the answer. As far as special needs trusts are concerned, and trust under court supervision, that is a day-to-day joy, right? No, there's a lot of accountability when you have things under court supervision. I'm prompting you here. Right, no. With us, it's a joy. No. We can't, I wish we can't make it a joy. We can make it tolerable, maybe. No, everything is under court supervision with a level of accountability that sometimes will drive you cuckoo, right? I mean, we don't want to invite that if it's not necessary, right? I mean, because that's part of the way that works. So you got to look at succession. What is it you're trying to do? The vast majority of the cases we have are not savings cases. They're in and out money. Like with Erica, money in, money out, right? I don't know about Scott's, but a lot of things where we're doing this housing thing, money in, money out, right? It never builds to anything.
And then the
Here.
threshold, if you keep it below, what is it, the 177, you don't have that issue.
Right, so there's many uses of it. With that, just kind of in closing, I'll hang around for a bit, but we're officially over, even though even Ben left already. I saw you wave goodbye here. Special needs trust, part of it is you really want to focus and learn as much as you can about what it is you're trying to do. Ideally, when you're hiring an attorney, and honest to God, actually, quite frankly, we're so backed up right now. If you want to have your trust done by the end of the month, we're not the place to go. We're very busy right now. There are a lot of other offices. Ideally, when you're doing this, make sure the office not only has experience in establishing the trust, but also in counseling or assisting in managing the trust. Because I will tell you, when I first did this, I had no idea what I was doing. There was no guidance for me. And I learned a lot from my own clients about the do's and don'ts, mostly by screwing up somebody else's estate plan. But you learn this through experience, what works and what doesn't work. And so keep this in mind. You're not just buying a document, you're buying the experience of a law firm. There are many law firms in the area that are getting better and better. I would love to tell you that we are the only one, but we are not, right? So really, while you're asking your questions, I know you want to ask, do you do special needs trust, and how much does it cost? Of course, you're going to ask that. But the other one is, well, how much experience have you had in assisting in the actual administering of these trusts? If they don't have that experience, you're just buying a document, and you're really not going to get the full thing. I want to thank you. Make sure you leave. They do look, she's on the planning committee. They really do look at people's comments. The amount of work they put into these programs is incredible, right? You've been, in fact, the planning will start probably next week for next year, right?
We've got a couple of months.
Is that it? But they work hard here. I want to thank you guys a lot. And then make sure you watch that Keep the Letterman Promise video. It's worth the trouble. Question?